Welcome to Edge Essentials, where we don't just revise, we master. This session, I want to take you inside one of the richest extracts in the AQA Paris Anthology. Text 28 from Alistair Horne's 7 Ages of Paris. The passage we're about to analyze is a window onto Restoration Paris, the years between 1815 and 1871. And it's a dazzling piece of writing because of how Horne uses language to do the work of a historian, a novelist, and a cultural critic all at once. Before we go anywhere near a quotation, I want you to notice what kind of text this is. It's not a primary source. It isn't Balzac's Paris or Hugo's Paris. It's a 21st century historian writing about that 19th century city. So everything we'll find on the page, the long sentences, the French loan words, the embedded quotations from Heine and Mrs. Trollope, is a direct, deliberate, stylistic choice. Horne is curating Paris for a modern English-speaking reader. The aim of this presentation is therefore very practical. By the end of these slides, you should be able to walk into the exam, identify any feature in this extract by its language level, quote it precisely, and explain what it does. We'll cover genre, register, audience, mode, purpose, and subject. Then we'll move through every language level, Lexis, grammar, discourse, pragmatics, and phonology, and finish the key representations of Paris, and a 5-question quiz to lock the analysis into memory. Let's begin with context, because language and literature examiners reward you for situating the text. 7 Ages of Paris was published in 2002 by Alistair Horne, a British historian and journalist who specialized in modern France. His structural conceit is Shakespearean. He divides Paris into 7 ages, like the 7 ages of man, each one a distinct, turbulent epoch in the city's evolution. Our extracts sits inside age 5. Which spans from the fall of Napoleon in 1815 to the collapse of the Second Empire in 1871. That gives Horne 3 regimes to work with: the Bourbon Restoration of Louis XVIII and Charles X, the July monarchy of Louis Philippe, and the Second Empire of Napoleon III. It's the Paris before Baron Holzmann's Grand Boulevards, so what we get is the medieval, labyrinthine city on the brink of being torn down. On the right of the slide you can see the framework summary: genre, mode, register, audience, purpose, subject. Notice already the breadth. Horne weaves architecture, social class, public health, culture and political revolt into a single, textured portrait. That breadth is what makes the text so generous as an examination passage. Whichever angle the question takes, there's evidence. Before we move on, make sure you go onto our website and shop our AQA A-Level Paris Anthology Revision Guide now. Use code LANGTERM for 10% off all A-Level products. This is a broken down version of each extract with key quotes and analysis. On to framework analysis. Genre first. This text is a hybrid. What we might call literary nonfiction or popular history, or even urban biography. Horne uses every convention of academic history: precise dates, statistics, footnotes, citations from contemporary witnesses, but he also writes with the storytelling instinct of a novelist: characters, scenes, ironies, set pieces. That hybridity is the whole point. He's making history that reads like literature. Look at the quoted phrase: the great dead hand of Napoleonic censorship was lifted. That isn't the language of a textbook. Great dead hand is a literary metaphor. Censorship as a corpse, gripping the city. So already in his transitional sentences, Horne is signaling genre by leaning into figurative language. Mode is more straightforward but no less important. This is a written text, planned, edited, published, monologic. There is no spontaneity here, no false starts, no fillers. The sentences are long, syntactically complex, and they include things you would never speak aloud, like italicized foreign long words. The Garda Schemandefert. All the footnotes, all of that signals a prestige, written, register designed to be read slowly and reread, not delivered to a listening audience. Whenever you analyze mode, ask yourself, could this realistically be spoken? With Horne, the answer is no, and that tells you something about the formality and the implied reader. Now let's tighten the lens with register, audience, and purpose, the three frameworks examiners most often want to see triangulated. Register is highly formal, literary, and learned. Notice the Latinate vocabulary, words like decrepitude and pestilential, miasmes, alongside French code switching like envy and classe dans la huse. Both raise the register. Latinate diction signals education, and French loanwords import European sophistication. The complex syntax reinforces that prestige register. Yet there are flashes of dry, almost conversational irony, questionable blandishments of city life, which prevent the register from becoming pompous. Audience flows naturally from register. Horne is writing for an educated, cultured, curious adult reader. Anglophone, with implied competence in French and with a baseline familiarity with Balzac, Hugo, the broad street sweep of European history. He doesn't translate his French phrases, and he doesn't gloss who Heine and Sue are. He assumes you'll cope, and that assumption itself is a register marker. The aside, a place one avoids walking through if accompanied by a lady, assumes a reader who'll appreciate the period decorum. Purpose is multifunctional. He informs. Look at the precise dates and population figures. He evokes. Century description carries you onto streets. He entertains with anecdote and dry wit, and quietly he persuades, presenting Paris as a city of seductive yet dangerous contradictions, an argument he never states boldly, but builds image by image. The bold epigraph, Paris frightens me, captures the ambivalence. This is a city that thrills and terrifies in the same breath. Subject takes us deeper. The subject of the extract is not just Paris in the abstract. It's a very particular construction of Paris, a city of contradictions. I want you to commit 4 representations to memory because almost any exam question on this passage can be answered by reaching for at least one of them. First, Paris as personified, gendered, female. Horne writes of her hollow-cheeked pair of sallow denizens, and elsewhere calls Paris, lady of the world, first among queens. The possessive her grants Paris animosity and sex. She isn't a backdrop, she's a character. Second, the splendour versus squalor diet. This is the master pattern of the extract. Splendid galleries sit beside rows of mean hovels. The glitter of Champs-Élysées is set against the labyrinth of narrow streets where vice and crime flourished. Horne never lets you have one without the other. Third, Paris is predatory, or even dangerous. One of the most striking metaphors describes Paris as a city that swallows up gifted individuals and dries out the intellectual capacities of the nation. Those dynamic verbs, swallows, dries out, turn the city into something carnivorous. It consumes its citizens. And fourth, Paris as a palimpsest, a layered text where regime writes over regime. The revived Louis XVI style of architecture, the obelisk filched from Egypt, the July column on the Bastille. each one a visible scar of a previous era. The city itself becomes a written historical record. We move on now to language levels. And we begin with Lexis and semantics, word choice and meaning. Look at the first left-hand panel. French code switching. Horne italicizes foreign loan words throughout the extract. On Rishi Sevu, classe Lablavuus, classe Donjohus, and we. Quartier Attilia. The italicization is graphological. That is, a feature of how the words look on the page. But the choice itself operates at the lexical level as a register marker. Each French phrase carries cultural and ideological freight that no English equivalent can. Enrichissez-vous, enrichissez-vous was the actual political slogan of Guizot under the July monarchy. So quoting it places us inside the bourgeois ideology of the period. Classe d'Anjous was a contemporary sociological taxonomy, a way the French elite classified the urban poor. Importing the original term preserves the cold taxonomic feel. Now the right-hand panel, semantic fields in opposition. Horne organizes his vocabulary into two opposing lexical sets. On one side, decay and disease, decrepitude, the very stink, stale, cabbage, untoned plumbing, hollow-cheeked, pale and sallow. We also have pestilential, miasma, squalid, malodorous. The cumulative effect is visceral. We don't just see poor Paris, we smell and feel it. On the other side, opulence and grandeur. Splendid galleries, opulent new arcades, stately monuments, magnificent, the elegant and affluent, glitter of Champs-Élysées, the lady of the world. Horne deliberately holds these two semantic fields side. Let's turn to grammar, which I want you to think about as sentence architecture, because Horne builds his sentences the way a Parisian builds a townhouse, layer upon layer. Read the key example at the top of the slide. Among the few novelties was the chapeau expiatoire, built, first things first, for Parisians to atone the murder of Louis XVI and his queen on the exact place where they had originally been buried, and, with fine irony, the Rue Napoleon was renamed the Rue de la Paix. One sentence does extraordinary work here. First feature. Hypotactic complexity. Hypotactis is the technical term for sentences built from a main clause with multiple subordinate clauses dependent on it. Notice how this single sentence stitches together the building. The reason for the building, the location, and the second main clause about the renaming. It's stretched across dashes and a semicolon. That layered architecture mirrors the layered city itself. Palimpsest in syntactic form. Second, parenthetical asides. The dashes, first things first, and, with fine irony, aren't structurally necessary. They're authorial intrusions. They let Horne whisper a comment in the reader's ear without breaking the historical voice. That intimacy and dry humor is one of his signature moves. Third, passives and nominalization. Was renamed, was built, were swept aside. These are agentless passives. We don't know exactly who did the renaming or the rebuilding. And Horne doesn't tell us. That's the impersonal rhetoric of historiography, where events take on a momentum of their own. But notice he uses the passive selectively. When he wants you to feel a force, he switches into an active verb, and that's where the Paris's predator personification comes in. Discourse means how the text is organized at the level above the sentence. Horne's discourse choices are as deliberate as is Lexis. Start with the section headings: the profile of Restoration Paris, health and hygiene, bread and circuses, the July monarchy. Notice that they are thematic rather than purely chronological. He could have organized the chapter by year. Instead, he organizes it by topic. That tells you something about purpose. He wants the reader to grasp Paris through its themes, not its timeline. Second, temporal cohesion. Within each thematic section, time didactic markers like by 1830, in 1827, in June 1833, anchor each topic shift. They give the prose the forward sweep of historiography, while leaving Horne free to romp thematically. Third, polyphony. And this is a crucial term to know. Polyphony means many voices. Horne starts his discourse with embedded quotations from Heine, Mrs. Trollope, Balzac, Sue, Rambuteau. The text becomes a chorus of contemporary witnesses. This achieves two things. It gives Horne historical authority because he isn't just asserting things, and it lets him hide behind other voices when the judgment is sharp. Fourth, the footnoted aside on the July column, a favorite jumping-off place, is grammatically a footnote, but pragmatically, it's a confidential whisper to the reader. That tonal shift downward into footnote register is part of the discourse machinery. Finally, on the right of the slide, the governing pattern. Horne organizes whole paragraphs around antithetical rich and poor, splendor and squalor, glitter and labyrinth. The discourse architecture of the extract is essentially the discourse architecture of contradiction. When you're asked to comment on structure, that's your single best observation. Pragmatics is the highest tariff language level at A level. It's how meaning is generated beyond the literal words. Horne is a master of this because he rarely passes explicit judgment on Paris. He generates meaning through implicature, irony, and connotation. Take the first card, irony. With fine irony, the Rue Napoleon was renamed the Rue de la Paix. Notice the metalinguistic phrase, with fine irony. That's Horne explicitly directing the reader's attention to the political symbolism of the renaming. The street of the defeated emperor, the man who plunged Europe into war, becomes the street of peace. The irony isn't just in the act, it's in the error's willingness to perform it. By flagging it, Horne aligns the reader with his ironic stance. Second card, implicature. The questionable blandishments of city life. Look at the hedge, questionable. He doesn't say city life is corrupting. He merely calls it blandishments. Its seductions, questionable. This is what the philosopher Grice would call flouting the maxim of quantity. He is underspecified, and the reader infers a moral critique that he never voices. That's classic implicature, and a high-grade analytical move. Third card, euphemism. These unfortunates, as they were euphemistically called. Here Horne does something fascinating. He uses the period euphemism for prostitutes, but then immediately calls attention to the fact that it's a euphemism. He gives himself plausible deniability while exposing how Restoration Paris lexicalized and therefore tolerated prostitution. The metalinguistic comment, as they were euphemistically called, is the engine of the critique. Phonology in a written text is sometimes overlooked, but Horne writes for what we might call the inner ear. Read these phrases aloud and you'll hear the patterning. We've got alliteration, a web of narrow, ill-paved and filthy streets. Listen to that cluster of plosive p and fricative f sounds. They're tactile, abrasive, and the sound mimics the rough surface of the streets being described. That's sound symbolism doing semantic work. Then we have sibilance, squalid, malodorous, and overcrowded. The hissing s and z sounds create an unpleasant, queasy texture. The prose almost smells because the sibilants stage an atmosphere of foulness. We have onomatopoeia, click-clopping appearance on the clogged streets. The reduplicative, click-clopping, is the classic sound of a horse-drawn omnibus, and Horne pairs it with the consonants of the K sound across click, clopping, and clogged. Sound is knitted to image. We've got rhythmic tripling, the tricolon, narrow, ill-paved and filthy, squalid, malodorous and overcrowded. 3 is the classical rhetorical rhythm, balanced, sermon-like, persuasive. Cicero used it, Lincoln used it, Horne uses it constantly. Whenever you see 3 modifiers in a row, name it as a tricolon and explain its measured authority. Assonance, hollow-cheeked, pale and sallow denizens. Long open vowels O and A stretch the line and slow the pace. Slow rhythm carries pity. The prose mimics the heavy, weakened bodies it describes. And finally, plosives, pestilential, miasmas, benumbs passers-by. The hard p, b, t stops, convey the violence of the stench. The sound enacts the assault on the body, so phonology in Horne is never decorative. It's expressive. This slide is your revision spine. So if you remember nothing else, remember these 6 recurring techniques. You can name them, you can quote them, and you can analyze them in any exam question on this extract. 1. Antithetical juxtaposition. Rich beside poor, splendour beside squalor, past beside present. This is the master pattern. 2. French code switching. Italicize long words as register markers, importing cultural authenticity. 3. Personification of Paris, the city as a living gendered character, feminine, predatory, regal, threatening. 4. Embedded contemporary voices, Balzac, Kane, Mrs. Charlotte, Eugene Sue, polyphonic witnesses giving the prose historical authority. 5. Parenthetical authorial wit, dashes and brackets carrying dry irony, smuggling personality into a historical narrative. 6. Statistical anchoring, precise dates and figures 1830, 1827, the July column, lending the prose a weight of authority. If you can attach a quotation to each of those 6, you have a portable kit of analysis you can deploy in any answer. That's the goal of revision. We've covered the analysis, now let's stress test it. The next 5 slides are multiple choice questions, each one targeting a different language level we've just discussed. There are 4 options per question and only 1 is correct. I want you to read each question carefully. Notice how the wrong answers are designed to be plausible. They often use the right terminology applied to the wrong feature. Take a moment after each question to commit to an answer before I reveal it. The full answer key with explanations will come straight after. Here is question 1. Pause the video and have a go answering. Here is question 2. Here is question 3. Here is question 4. Finally, here is question 5. Okay, so question 1, it says which feature best describes Horne's repeated use of italicized French long words. So, the correct answer was B. The italicization is graphological, but the function of the foreign words themselves operates at the lexical and pragmatic levels. They aren't decorative, they carry ideological and cultural meaning that no English equivalent could. Option A undersells the effect. Option C misuses the term historic present, which is a tense, not a vocabulary feature. And option D confuses lexical borrowing with phonological imitation. Question 2 asked what pragmatic effect is created by the parenthetical phrase with fine irony in the Rue Napoleon was renamed Rue de la Paix. So the correct answer is C, with fine irony, is metalinguistic, that is, language about language. Horne is explicitly drawing attention to the irony of the renaming rather than letting the reader find it. That flagging produces an implicature. The reader is invited to read the renaming as a political comment. Option A is wrong because the phrase doesn't soften, it sharpens. Option B confuses pragmatics with phonology, and option D wrongly identifies it as a euphemism, which is a different pragmatic move. Question 3. Identify the dominant semantic field in the very stink of the Paris of the poor, the stale cabbage and untuned plumbing, hollow-cheeked pale and sallow denizens. So the correct answer is D. Stinkin', stale, untuned, hollow, cheek, paled, swallow, sallow. Every lexical item belongs to a single semantic field of physical and social decline. Notice how the field is multisensory. It covers smell, sight, even sound, with untuned plumbing. The other options pull from semantic fields completely absent from this passage. Question 4. How does the quotation, a city that swallows up gifted individuals and dries out the intellectual capacities of the nation, represent Paris? So the correct answer is A. The dynamic verb swallows up and dries out grant Paris animacy and threat. The metaphor is digestive and almost vampiric. The city devours and depletes. This is one of the recurring representational patterns we identified earlier. Paris as a predator. Option B contradicts dynamic verbs, option C is far too narrow, and option D has no support in the passage. Finally, question 5. Which grammatical feature most characterizes Horne's prose in this extract? So the correct answer is C. Horne's signature sentences are long, layered and parenthetical. We saw that on the grammar slide with the chapelle split expiatoire example. Option A is the opposite of what Horne does. Parataxis means stringing simple sentences side by side, like a tabloid. Horne is family hypotactic. Option B is wrong because there are no imperatives. Option D is wrong because there are no interrogatives addressed to the reader. Length and complexity are part of the texture of Horne's prestige register, recognizing that is half the analytical battle. So if you scored 5 out of 5, you have a working command of every language level relevant to this extract. If you scored 3 or 4, look back at the video for the levels that you missed. If you score fewer than 3, don't worry, re-watch everything. And, quote, test yourself, try to recall a quotation for each of the 6 signature techniques. The point of these questions isn't memorization, it's training your eye to attach the right terminology to the right textual feature fast. That's the skill that wins marks. We end where we started, in French. Bonne chance. Good luck. But remember, in the exam, look plays a small role. 3 habits will carry you. First, quote precisely, don't paraphrase Horne. Lift the exact phrase, the italicized long word, the tricolon, the dynamic verb. The examiner needs to see the textual evidence on the page. Second, name the language level. Don't just say this word. Say, this is a lexical choice, or this is a phonological device, or this is a pragmatic implicature. Naming demonstrates control of the framework. Third, and most importantly, Link feature to effect. Every quotation should be followed by an analysis of what the feature does to the reader, to the representation of Paris, to the register, to the historical argument. Feature plus effect is the fundamental sentence pattern of every successful language and literature answer. Quote it, name it, explain it. Do those three things consistently with this extract, and Restoration Paris will reward you. One chance, and thank you.